Pakistani American print and electronic media, and Pakistani American think tank is our goal to achieve with different intellectuals, start discussions, seminars, and lectures among multi-ethnic communities. We are trying to reach Washington, D.C. to discuss Pakistani affairs, bilateral relations, Pakistani and America, especially different think tanks, and we will start very soon our program, and I'm requesting my senior fellow Bashir Kamar, he will be host the program tonight, and please welcome to Bashir Kamar. Give him a good hand because he is one of the big asset to our community. He will discuss before the guests come.
Ladies and gentlemen, in a few minutes, we are expecting our chief guest to be here and we are going to start the program, inshallah, in a couple of minutes. So I will be very grateful to you if you can stay with us. Thank you very much. Washington, D.C. for opening the line of communication between the Pakistan and American mainstream politicians. He is specialized on the U.S. relationship. He drives and does organize many programs on Washington, D.C. He is also working very closely with a lot of American politicians like congressmen, senators, and he has been active for the last 34 years in Washington, D.C. on the Capitol Hill. He is very active, and I feel very honored and proud to call Dr. Nisar Chaudhry on the stage, please. Dr. Nisar Chaudhry. Wrote 12 books on different different countries' relationship, but he's a master on communications and thoughts on the Asian, Pak, Indian specialized issues. So I request Mr. Stephen Phillips to come on the stage, please. He's our chief guest. And as you know that we have been starting all our program with the recitation of Quran.
لكم دينكم ولي دين صدق الله العظيم.
From the seats, and we are going to say the national anthem of United States of America. National anthem. national anthem, so please be stand for the national anthem of Pakistan. Welcome, welcome, welcome on behalf of Pakistani American community of Long Island, Pakoli, Pakistani Americans of New York, Pani, and American think tank. I welcome you all on this beautiful Monday evening. It is very difficult to have any program on those working days while we have all-day working schedule, but you guys prove that we love Pakistan, and Pakistan is a country for which we are thinking about, and I'm thankful to all of you for this evening to be present here in this hall. And before we move further, I would like to invite Malik Salim Ahmed, who's having 2 master's degrees, one in international relationship and one in political science, and he is awarded from Geneva, United Nations Graduate Study Program in 1994, and I request him to please come here and say a few welcome word to you. Malik Salim Ahmed.
Thank you very much, Bashir Kamar Sahab. Respected Chief Guest, Stephen Cohen, Dr. Chaudhry, and President of Pakistani American think tank, Raja Razak. Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention, please? Pakistani American think tank, we established last year, 23rd of March, 2015, and I'm living in this great country more than 22 years, and hardly we see there is some organization, they do work to create more bilateral and multilateral relation, not only with Pakistani and American relation, but also in other countries. And today we live in 21st century, where we need more technology, more advancement, and more ideas. And when we have chief guests like Stephen Cohen, who already wrote 12 books, and I'm very lucky I have 3 out of 12, and Shooting for a Century, my personal opinion, is a great book. And we congratulate Mr. Stephen Cohen. And secondly, as a General Secretary of Pakistani American think tank USA, our goal to create more executives, more advancement, and more windows among different multi-ethnic groups, and we show the real positive myth of Pakistan. We trying our best to create more organizations and welcome more organizations, because I believe as a community activist, as a writer, as a TV anchor, this is my duty, and my team, this is our duty and obligation to create more and more for the sake of Pakistan, because when we say we are Pakistani American, then by intention, implications, and physically we have to prove that we are proud to live United States of America, and we are proud to be a Pakistani. So once again, I just want to tell you that because I have a master's degree in international relations and political science, and I have a research work couple of years, and my other fellow Mr. Asif Jamal. He is Chief Executive of ARY Digital Network, and he was the one. We all went to the Geneva, and we have so many discussions, seminars, and different ways to create Pakistan in front of the world with positive image. And what is image? Image, your credibility identified your country. So Pakistani American think tank, once again, welcome to everyone. And our chief guest, everybody knows he's 500 most influential scholars. And not, I'm not saying only in the United States, but wherever the world read his books, people knows how he has a command in Indo-Pak relation and South Asian security. So before I end up, I just want to introduce Pakistani American think tank team. I am requesting our fellow public relation of Pakistani American think, Sayyid Wasim, to please come here. Sayyid Wasim, please give him a good hand. And I'm just requesting the president of Pakistani American think tank, Raja Razak, to please come by shoulder with Sayyid Wasim, and we want to show that what is the main purpose of this organization, this forum, to create more ways, more bilateral, multilateral discussion, dialogues, and seminars. And this is our motto, and that's why we welcome all the organizations. We have more than 15 Pakistani American-based organizations, and everyone, they are working in this country with great temptations, and we always respect everyone. Either is Pakoni, League of USA, League of America, Bronx Community Council. So please, Raja Razak, come for a minute right here. And we want to show that, and I'm the General Secretary of Pakistani American think tank, and I'm requesting, please join, have to discussions, seminars, debates, and show the right positive bilateral and other matters, especially 21st century, what we need more dialogues. And Pakistani American think tank, I'm requesting our fourth pillar of Pakistani American think tank, Fayaz Khan, please come over here. Shahid Comrade, requesting to the Shahid Comrade, please come here. Shahid Comrade. So, ladies and gentlemen, these are. And the last person in our team, he's a very senior fellow, he's a writer, he's a poet, he's a community activist, he has command also international politics. Dr. Shafiq, please requesting to the Dr. Shafiq, please join them.
New York, and we highly appreciate their efforts. Before we move further to the program, we have a lot of friends from Pakistani American media. I'm thankful to all of them being present here, and I appreciate their efforts. May Allah reward them for their hard work. It is very hard to do the work in Pakistani American community, and these people have been serving this community for the last 25 to 30 years, when it was very hard to have any information from the Pakistan. They have been working day and night to bring so much information and so much knowledge and so much education from Pakistan and spread this in this Pakistani American community. So thank you very much, Pakistani American media. Just to remind all of you that today's program has been organized by Pakistani American community of Long Island, Pakoli, and Pakistani American think tank, and Pakistani Americans of New York also. So you have seen one team here, and I hope everybody knows the Pakoli team, everybody knows the Pioneer. But at this time, to move the program further, I would like to request Raja Razak, who is Secretary for Pakistani, President for Pakistani American think tank, to please come on the stage here, on the podium here, and introduce, say a few words, and introduce to the Dr. Nisar Saab. Thank you very much.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Honorable guest, Mr. Stephen Cohen, I welcome you to New York. Dr. Nisar Chaudhry Saab, I welcome to you New York too. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. I know today is a Monday evening and it's very difficult to come from the distance. Some people coming from New Jersey, Brooklyn, Staten Island, Bronx, and it takes, normally, if you're coming on the weekend, it takes like 30, 40 minutes, but if you're coming in the weekdays, it takes some time in more than a couple of hours. So I really thankful to all of you. I also thankful to my team, Pani. Zahir Mer Saab is also sitting somewhere in the audience. I welcome him. He's a chairman of Pani. Where is the, he's right there. And I also very thankful to Mr. Shafkat Tanveer. He's the president of Pakistan People's Party. He's here. Actually, I'm naming those people who helping me throughout this time to organize this evening. Also, I welcome my Baji, Ms. Nigat Khan. She's been working also to make this evening beautiful, and she was contacting with so many people. Also, I have a representation of Kashmir, Sardar Sawar Sahab. I am really honored and thank you again and again. I have no word to express. Thank God I am very lucky that some people work and wait for years to achieve that. But Alhamdulillah, within a very short time, I'm very blessed to organize a meaningful evening which definitely will help us to improve relationship between the United States and Pakistan. And I am very lucky, I still remember that moment when I saw Dr. Nisar Chaudhry in Washington and the way he was working. I had a desire and wish that, I wish that I can, know him better and he could be in my friend list. And it took me a year when I saw him. Last year when I called him, and he was also very happy, and we invited him for the first event which we organized last year, the Independence Day of Pakistan. And he was, so happy to come and join us for that evening. Dr. Nisar Chaudhry, the work which he's doing, I wish our diplomatic front can do that work. I think his work is way better than the way our diplomatic front is doing. I wish we have more backup for him, and he can continue this work. And most of the people already know about him. He's Tamga Imtiaz also. He received from the government of Pakistan for his services to Pakistan. And now, I'm not going to take much time. I will invite Dr. Nisar Chaudhry to come to podium and carry on the program. Dr. Nisar Chaudhry.
Thank you very much, Raja Sahab, for the kind remarks. I am so grateful to Pani, to Pakoli, to Pakistani think tank, Salim Ahmed Malik Sahab, Raja Sahab, or Bashir Sahab, Bashir Kamar Sahab. And special thanks for the community on the weekdays who have taken out time to really participate in this evening and making it a success. My special thanks go to the media people. I really commend and deeply appreciate that they have taken time to cover this evening, to cover this event. And my thanks to each one of you who is here to participate and to listen to Steve Cohen. Steve Cohen is a friend, and our friendship stretches back to almost 30 years. And he's in Brookings, a scholar who has virtually created the field of South Asia security studies. And he has written, edited, co-edited, or co-authored 16 books, and I don't know any scholar who has written so many books on our region, on South Asia. He is not only the one who has a feel over the territory, he has a not only simple handle on the territory, he has a grip on the territory. And listening to him is like a treat. The latest books he has written, Shooting for a Century, where India-Pakistan relationships he has focused on. And then just recently, his papers on South Asia, another book. It's a masterpiece. You will be amazed that he is writing for the last 50 years on that region. And all his speeches and his articles and his important chapters from all the previous work of 50 years, he has compiled them in one book, Papers on South Asia. He was in England in 1963, and there he interviewed several generals who were generals in India during the British Raj, including even General Gracie. And he was always keen and curious and remained involved. He has covered to so many times. He has been visiting India, Pakistan, and giving his input to both the countries. And naturally, how to promote and protect American interests, and how can we work together so that we can grow together. Steve Cohen often described Inside the Beltway as a dean of the US South Asia Studies, is a dominant figure in Washington, D.C. in the field of military history, military sociology, and South Asia's strategic emergence. I don't have to say a lot because he will be covering all these bases, but certainly I would pose certain questions as a part of his introduction, and he will highlight those points, he will start those points, he will expand the pictures on that point, he will roll out his vision on those points. After all, US-Pakistan has a long history of friendship. Many highs and lows came. There had been rain and shine, war or peace, highs or lows. Ultimately, our relationship survived. And these days, particularly, our relationship in 2013 had gone to the lowest level in 2011. During the Raymond case, during the case of Osama bin Laden, and then the tragedy of Salalah, Pakistan and USA virtually stopped speaking to each other. In 2012, they were trying to speak to each other. And 2013, when the Prime Minister of Pakistan visited USA, they started speaking to each other. And that is when the working groups meant for strategic dialogues, all of those groups were revived. And we especially asked that we want another group to work on these areas, and that should be on education. And even USA has made another working group to work on education. And right now, Steve Cohen will have his own opinion, but in my observation, since we work together with the administration, with the think tanks, our relationship with USA has certainly improved, and the trajectory is right, and we have compatible narratives on many issues, and USA understand now not only the sensitivities, but even the capacity of Pakistan and limitations of Pakistan, because they have experienced their own capacity and their own limitations, what is happening in the world. They have realized if we have limitations, being the superpower, the solo player, why Pakistan can't have those limitations. So that is another positive thing. And how these relations go from here, because there was a time when we always said Pakistan is a tough neighborhood. Now our neighbors say that they are in a tough neighborhood. And I will suggest that Steve should speak on this, update us on these things, and tell us about the future of these relations and the future of relations of USA with Afghanistan, with India, and where does he place Pakistan in that context. Ladies and gentlemen, Steve Cohen is not only my friend, we have a big group of friends. We call it a galaxy of friends, or Asia Watchers. And he's one of those most shining stars of that group. And he's my teacher, my mentor, and he allured me into this area. And I developed a knack for this and developed a passion for this area. Because as Raja Sahib was mentioning that I do good things for Pakistan, believe me, when I do these things, it's not a favor to any political party leader. It's a service. And I only exercise for enduring US-Pakistan relations and a safer and secure Pakistan. Please join me. Please join me in welcoming our friend, teacher.
I've always wanted to begin a speech by saying, my fellow Americans. And listening to you sing and play flag, and listening to you sing along with the Pakistani national anthem reminds me very much of my own family. Both my grandfathers came over to the United States many years ago, after 1905, 1906, and my father and mother were born here. When we would have arguments in our family, I remember them as a kid growing up. Were we Jews? Were we Americans? Were we potential Israelis? It was very interesting hearing that debate go on. And I know that among the Pakistani American community, you also have these debates, but you are Americans, so whatever you are Americans. So I'm happy to begin a talk for the first time by saying that. Let me thank Dr. Nassar and other Dr. Nassar, his daughter, who has taken us around, for his hospitality and organizing this event, and the three organizations that put it together. I know this was done at the last minute. I planned to be in New York yesterday for the Lahore Literary Festival. I've always wanted to go to Lahore for the Literary Festival. Well, it came to New York. I spoke there, and it was a wonderful day, and I hope they have more festivals in New York as well as in Lahore. So let me speak briefly about a few things which may interest you. I hope they do. And we come back to the question of what kind of Americans we all are, perhaps later in American politics, in questions and answers. The book that I came to launch, and this is the launch, in fact, this is the first time I've spoken about it, really consists of 19 or 20 articles of mine written over the last 50 years. 3 of them deal with Pakistan, or actually 4 of them deal with Pakistan. I first wrote about Pakistan in 1964 for an Indian journal. Then I wrote again in 1970s, 80s, 90s, and the last piece in there is about American policy towards Pakistan, how the US-Pakistan alliance ruined Pakistan. It was an alliance which we did not benefit that much and hurt Pakistan in many ways also. It had its pros and cons, and we're recalibrating, trying to refigure out the relationship between Pakistan and the United States. I'll speak briefly about that. But I went to South Asia as a young graduate student in 1963. Nehru was still alive, Ayub Khan, I think, was still alive. The war between India and Pakistan was 2 years away, it was my introduction to South Asia, India. I didn't go to Pakistan until 1977. I applied for a visa, but I was turned down by the government of Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, for better or for worse. I've never met Bhutto, but I remember sitting in Zia's living room, suggesting to Zia Haq, that Bhutto's life be spared, because I didn't think it would do anybody any good to hang Bhutto. Zia was listening to his own advisors, had his own mind, and Bhutto was hung, which I thought was a tragic event for Pakistan. But I went to South Asia to begin with, to deal with a puzzle, a question. All research scholars have puzzles or questions. And my puzzle could only be answered by going to India and Pakistan. And the puzzle was, why does the military in some states take over power and not take over in other states? And India and Pakistan were the perfect comparison. And all of this is described in the book. There's a whole chapter describing how I got interested in South Asia and India and Pakistan. And I won't give you the answer, read the book for it, and much of my writings is about that, how I solved that puzzle. But I first went to Pakistan in 1977. I traveled third class, stayed in 4 two-star hotels, got to know Pakistan a little bit on my own. Uske baad hamare Hindustani acha hai, abhi kuch nahi hai, or Punjabi khatam ho gaya, no Punjabi at all. So I have to, my Hindi was much better, Hindustani was much better. So I traveled around the country, and I met President Zia. He invited me to come back, and I wrote my first book on Pakistan called the Pakistan Army. I thought it was a good book. He thought it was a lousy book, and he banned it. But then he told me that he was banning my book because Pakistanis would be too sensitive to some of the things I discuss in there. And in the book, he said this explicitly, in the book I compare Israel and Pakistan, 2 states founded for the protection of a persecuted religious minority. He said, we can't publish it in Pakistan. Then he added, he had a sense of humor. People will read it because we banned it. And it's true. It circuited underground in Pakistan for the next couple of years until it was published. So my original puzzle was about the military in Pakistan. So I've made about 15 or 20, maybe 30 trips to Pakistan since then, sometimes going back twice a year. Never for more than a month or 2. I don't claim to be a Pakistan expert. I know something about Pakistan, especially the military in Pakistan. And really my views, looking back at what I've written over the past 50 years, sobering experience, but I think my views have not changed that much. And basically, Pakistan is a country that was trying to run on one strong leg, and that strong leg was the army. It had never developed a sufficient, competent civilian component. It was always a military component. And the irony was, to me as an American, that's what Pakistan's attraction was to the United States. In a sense, we never met a Pakistani military dictator we didn't like. Because the Pakistani military and many civilians would pretend to do our bidding. Pakistan was the most allied of allies of all. And I never thought that was accurate. I thought Pakistan was serving its own interest. We were serving our interest. It was always a transactional relationship. And a friend of mine, a general, wrote in an article, published an article recently, of the trust deficit between the United States and Pakistan. I thought that was wrong. And because I was in the Reagan administration briefly, 2 years. And Reagan came up with the phrase, trust but verify. In other words, you don't trust unless you can verify the other side's actions. And I've always thought that's the principle that should guide our relations with any state, whether it's Pakistan or the Soviet Union or India or anybody. So I thought that the U.S.-Pakistan relationship actually was damaging Pakistan. There was some good came to it. Substantial aid program, a lot of weapons. The universities were funded, and again, during this latter Afghan war, this continued. But I was always ambivalent about the aid relationship. There's a book by Ambassadors Howard and Teresita Schaefer, which I think is the best book on Pakistan I've ever read. It's really very good. And it's about how Pakistan negotiates with the United States. It's the most truthful, straightforward book by two diplomats you could ever read. Very good. In a sense, we lie to Pakistan, Pakistan lies to us, and we're all happy. But lying as the basis of a relationship only goes so far. There might be a Raymond Davis case or Osama bin Laden incident where the lies suddenly become explosive, literally. So I think it was not a good relationship for two states to have. I think since 2011, 2012, relationship is on a more honest and even keel. We get things from Pakistan, Pakistan gets things from us. There are critics in both countries, but on balance, people are pleased with the way things are going, with one exception. Here I speak for many Indians, many Chinese, as well as many American officials. There's deep concern in America over Pakistan's direction, rising Islamic extremism, terrorism, and so forth. And of course, the use of what I would call terrorists by the Pakistani state to destabilize both Afghanistan and India. And that's unacceptable, obviously, to the Indians and the Afghans. I think it's unacceptable to the Americans. But we're working on that. In a sense, it's an issue of discussion between the two countries. Let me say something about Pakistan's domestic politics and future. I edited a book about 5 years ago. It had a very clever title, The Future of Pakistan. It was about the future of Pakistan. We think of these clever titles at Brookings. It was a collection of essays by, I think, the best scholars in the world, Pakistani, American, British, European, and Indian, about different aspects of Pakistan. And I wrote a summary essay to describe everybody's views. 5, 6 years ago, my judgment was, Pakistan will sort of get by. It won't do very well, but it won't collapse and it won't fail. And if I had to write that book again, I'd come to the same conclusion. Pakistan will sort of get through, muddle through, whatever term you want to use. It'll manage its difficulties. Yesterday in New York, at the Lahore Literary Festival, I saw a part of Pakistan which is exploding in a positive way. Really a very delightful way to see culture, literacy, art, music develop in Pakistan. There was a small window on what's happening in Pakistan. Our headlines are dominated by the bad things in Pakistan. And most of them are true, but clearly we don't pay, newspapers and the press don't pay attention to the good things that are happening in Pakistan or India for that matter. This is what drives, this is what drives in the news cycle. The bad news about America, the bad news about India, bad news about Pakistan. It sells newspapers or it gets eyeballs on screens, which is what counts financially. So let me say that I think we have a shared task ahead, and that is that I'm thinking collectively, myself, Dr. Nassar, others in the Washington policy community, and yourself. This is really a task you should worry about. how can we make sure and help inform the next administration about Pakistan and South Asia as a whole? You know, we do what we can do at think tanks. You lobby people, let people know what your views are. And I think that's important in a sense to have an educational function in America. American politics is driven by a lack of knowledge about a lot of issues. I won't talk about candidates, but some presidential candidates exploit our lack of knowledge about many things. And I'd say that's true about South Asia generally, but also Pakistan. We know what the headlines teach us every day, but the headlines are usually wrong or incorrect, and there's more stories behind the headlines. So I think we all have an obligation together, whether at a think tank like Brookings or Dr. Nassar's work, he runs a little seminar, in fact, in Washington, or your activities in the community, to sort of try and educate, inform politicians, the press, and so forth about things that interest you. That's your obligation not as a Pakistani American, but as an American, in a sense, to share your views and try and educate the press and professors and educators, and of course politicians and people who have been making policy. I think that we face a difficult task in the case of Pakistan because a picture of Pakistan has been painted by several people and groups and individuals, a state that is headed towards terrorism. I never thought that was right. I think the Pakistani state uses terrorists as an instrument of policy. But if I ever met a group of moderate people, it's the people in the Pakistan army. You know, many of you may have relatives in the military. I'm wearing my Punjab Frontier Force tie, celebrating a regiment I was associated with. And I think that, but the policy of using extremists or terrorists to destabilize neighbors is not going to be a successful policy for Pakistan. I think there's a debate in Pakistan about that. How much force should be used by the state, but I think it's corrupting and tainting Pakistani politics itself. Over the years, we've tried to keep track of the number of communal riots, sectarian riots, killings in Pakistan. The number is pretty high. The military can deal with it, but in fact, the military are not the front line against this kind of extremism. It has to be the police and the courts. And the degree to which Pakistani courts are not functioning or the police are not there is a serious issue for all of us to be concerned. In the long run, though, I'm fairly optimistic about Pakistan. In a sense, I meet a lot of young Pakistanis. I'm deeply impressed with their intelligence, their ability, their desire to do well in the world, not just materially, but in terms of policy. Whether I meet them in Washington or South Asia or elsewhere. You know, I think there's a new generation of young Pakistanis who might be the leaders of tomorrow. The problem with Pakistan, I've written this, so nothing new about it. It's sort of a khaki wall between people, able people in Pakistan, and power. As long as the army blocks people, citizens from power, and monopolizes political power itself, I think that Pakistan is not going to succeed the way it should succeed. I know many generals, many officers. I've met almost every army chief going back many years. I missed Ayub Khan, but I met the two British army chiefs, and then almost all the Pakistanis, including Raheel Sharif. And generally, they're very intelligent men. And generally, they do not know how to run a country. I remember talking to Musharraf right after his coup. And I said, General Saab, you know, you can't run Pakistan. You've got to turn it over to civilians. He said, no, we're going to teach them a lesson this time. We're going to do it right. I knew then he was going to fail. He could not, you know, the army cannot run Pakistan. But the army won't let anybody else run Pakistan. In a sense, that's Pakistan's dilemma. You have a group of talented, able officers who only understand military force. They're not good at politics, psychology, and they're very bad at economics. In a sense, the military itself has to pull back and allow civilians to fill in that space. That's an argument I made in 1964, 65. I'm sorry, 1984 with my first book on Pakistan Army. It's nothing new. I've been saying this now for 40 years. So let me sort of wind up here. And yeah, what do I talk about? Yeah. Let me wind up here and really give you a chance to ask questions. Sorry. Questions, comments, whatever you want. I'd be happy to respond. Anyway, thank you very much for your attention.
The first choice we are giving media people here. We have a lot of Pakistani American media, so we will request Pakistani American media to prepare the question. The first question I'm going to give the mic to Azim Amniya, the senior journalist from the Geo Television. Azim Amniya.
Hi, Dr. Stephen Bond. Sure. So your book, Shooting for a Century, was published in 2013. What kind of changes have taken place since then on India participation, and what kind of substantive resolution to the problem, including Kashmir, you have advocated so far? Because whenever somebody reads your writings, mostly they find a tilt towards India, and mostly the Pakistani readers view you are advocating the Indian side of policy, not Pakistan. How do you justify that?
Well,
Thank you, sir. Mr. Stephen Bond.
are we working here?
Yes, it's working.
Let me say that in India I'm seen as pro-Pakistani, and so I'm sort of caught between two countries. But the book, Shooting for a Century, I say is deeply pessimistic about normalization between India and Pakistan. I won't go into the details, they're laid out in the book, but I'm not optimistic about anything happening soon, nor do I think the U.S. is going to make much of a difference. What I think we have to do is accept the situation as it is and work towards normalization in every other sphere than Kashmir, and there's a few other tough issues. It's analogous to the Israeli-Palestinian dispute, which I think is intractable. The difference is that India-Pakistan is nuclearized, which attracts attention from the outside periodically. But I don't see any solution coming soon. Let me, as a footnote, say that these books are published by Brookings, and I get zero money from them. That is, as an author, they don't pay me anything. That's part of my job at Brookings. So buy as many as you want. Don't feel guilty that you're making me rich. I won't be rich. It's not an issue. But I do think that Shooting for a Century was the right title. I think that it'll be 2047 before there's any chance of normalization. As for Kashmir, I think it's such a deep issue between the two countries. It's part of everybody's DNA. My argument in the book is we should begin with an easy problem, that is Afghanistan, where both India and Pakistan have legitimate interest in the outcome of the situation in Afghanistan. Afghanistan was part of the Mughal Empire originally, and then became part of the British Empire in terms of political influence. I think to work on an issue like Afghanistan and water, where there's vital common interest between India and Pakistan. I talked to a senior Pakistani official about this, a general in fact. He said, we can't trust the Indians. Well, as I was driving here, I'm looking outside and I see everybody driving in a crazy way. And there's a famous song, they're all crazy out there, drivers. Every state thinks it's in a dangerous neighborhood. In India and Pakistan, each think its neighborhood is dangerous. In other words, that's a paranoid way of looking at the world. The Israelis are paranoid, the Palestinians are paranoid, Indians are paranoid, Pakistanis are paranoid. They exaggerate the danger of the threat from outside. It's real, but still I think that looking at it objectively, there should be room for discussion and dialogue. But I'm not optimistic.
And Steve, keep the answers short.
Okay.
Second sir.
Mic on.
I tend to go on too
Let
long.
me ask
Tend to go on too long.
Yes.
Only media, only media.
As Jamali is the CEO of AFI Digital and Network.
First of all, I welcome you, Stephen, here in this forum. From our writings, I have to wonder, did you choose to not highlight
What's your question?
Not the complexities. The complexities like the listener.
Yes, you can pass
For
on. It's an
example,
observation.
the Gujarat issue in
Only
India. For example, let's say the incident that's happened before 2013, that's missing out your face and buffing us. So a lot of religious factors that you mess up. In order for the two, it's very important for the two countries to have a cordial relationship with those elements be dissolved. So I don't see an angle in it basically.
What exactly don't you say? It's still not clear to me.
The complexities, I mean, in order for you to highlight the issues between the countries.
Okay, capacity for normalization or for,
Correct, yeah. If you-
yeah,
These countries are going to normalize in terms of the relationship. They need to discuss. Those point of view must be itemized, basically address it, and considering the neutral platform.
well,
Just say thank you very much for the short question.
yeah. I think that the difficulty lies at many levels, and you have to read the books to get a full understanding of it. But the perceptions of some Indians and some Pakistanis are so negative that there's no room for accommodation or compromise at all. So the book, the Shooting for a Century is actually essentially begins optimistically and ends very pessimistically. So that the capacities for normalization are there. In fact, South Asia used to be the most integrated region in the world economically. And the World Bank has done a book on this. South Asia is now the least integrated region in the world. So if you simply took trade and normalization economic, you would transform the region immediately. But there's some people on both sides are afraid of that. So.
Thank you, sir. So we have another one question from Dr. Mohammed Shafiq. He's a columnist in one of the Pakistani American newspaper, New York Around. Dr. Shafiq.
Yeah, my question is, if you did not shed any light on that particular issue, that whenever a jungle takes over in Pakistan, American is always supporting it. I'm asking that question because on NPR I heard that it is very easy for us, the CIA agents were discussing that matter, that it is very easy for us to change a leader in Pakistan and we call a general and he takes care of it. Again, on certain TV station I heard that another CIA agent, ex-CIA agent, Dr. Michael Schur, that Jewish lobby is so strong that they don't want any democracy in Muslim countries. They want tyranny. So I just want you to shed light on that because you have been expert on the issue. And I want to know what was your role positively or negatively in that particular area?
Yeah, let me take the last question first. I think I was in the Reagan administration for 2 years. In fact, was brought in to help the second military assistance program to Pakistan. And Pakistan's advantage was that it was a moderate Muslim country. And it was an advantage. But it's become a moderate Muslim country that also supports extremists in its neighbors. And that causes difficulties for the United States. So I think that's led to the breach between us in part. What was the first question? I'm sorry.
I was talking about the Jewish lobby who doesn't want democracy in Muslim countries.
No.
His name was Dr. Michael Schur.
I know him, but not well. Yeah. No, I think that's totally false. Why shouldn't a lobby of any sort, Jewish or Buddhist or Muslim, whatever it is, want democracy in Muslim countries? In fact, I was a go-between for a while between Pakistani government and some Jewish groups, lobbying groups here, trying to get the Pakistanis to sort of recognize the existence of Israel, which would have made a big difference in Congress's attitude towards Pakistan. That failed. Zia wasn't willing to do it. But he did allow Israeli people into Afghanistan. There was a period when the Israelis were going into Afghanistan. So there was informal Israeli Pakistani collaboration of its strategic zone in Afghanistan. But the notion that somehow Americans, Jews or otherwise, do not want to see democracy in Pakistan is bizarre. Of course we want to see democracy in Pakistan.
Next question, please.
Let me have my side Mansoor Hussain. He's a journalist and he is editor of Dunia Weekly.
How you foresee the present relation between the two countries, India and Pakistan, and how the U.S. or world powers solve the issues between the two countries when there is unresolved agenda of Kashmir should stay on the table.
Yeah. In Shooting for a Century, and some of my articles republished in the collection, South Asia Papers, I argue that basically the U.S. has messed up Kashmir by trying to impose a solution on the two countries. I don't think there'll be agreements soon between India, Pakistan, and Kashmir. However, there could be agreement between India and Pakistan on water. There was recently a major water agreement there is an agreement on the Indus Valley, and that could be built on. There are a lot of areas where the two countries could cooperate and have agreements. Trade and transit would be one in particular. So, and I don't think the U.S. is pushing this issue at all. I know Richard Holbrooke tried to, but he died, tragically, before he could do anything. So I think this is really, it's not a top agenda item for this Obama administration. Now, hopefully a new administration will take it more seriously.
Next question from Akshay Chaudhary. He's from my Capital Television.
My question is the relevance, but a little different. President Obama wrote the article in Washington Post on last week. He said President Obama TTP would not let America nor China lead the way of global trade. We Pakistan also related to China because China investing over there $45 billion. So how you can see, your opinion about this Obama statement? Second, on one interview, you mentioned you looking Kashmir issue. They no solving in recent time. Maybe after 20 years or 27 years, more than 27 years. So both questions is related to Pakistan.
Yeah, I don't see any movement in Kashmir at all. In fact, the world is tired of hearing about Kashmir, whether from the Indians or the Kashmiris or the Pakistanis. So I don't see that as an issue that any diplomat or government is going to pick up and push. I know Pakistanis would like to see it. In fact, when I talked to Musharraf right after his coup, he talked about a plan for Kashmir, which I thought was very much forward-looking. But since then, the Pakistan government has abandoned that, and that led to, I think that's wrong. In terms of Obama's policy, what was the first question? Pardon me?
President Obama, the TTP would not let America nor China lead the way on global trade. Their policy, they explain the policy next TTP, They said TTP, the countries were
Yeah. What I have noticed is that there's a coincidence of interest between moderate Pakistanis, America, India, and China about the TTP. None of those groups want to see Pakistan become more extremist than it is, or support these groups. And my hope is, I've been in Pakistan for 2-3 years now, that the army itself will stop its policy of supporting the Taliban on one side and fighting them on the other side. I think that's an inconsistent and incompatible policy. You can't support terrorists in one side and fight them on another. Some countries have done this, but usually to their regret.
Okay, let me have on my side James Supreme. He's a very senior journalist. Mr. James Supreme.
In Pakistan, related to the chief who is taking a very stern action against the terrorists, and how do you foresee his future in the country? Because
Thank you, sir.
How do I see the role of the military in Pakistan? Is that the question? Have I got that right? Yeah. I think that Raheel Sharif will find something else to do, but I'm not sure what it will be. I think that it's likely that he will want to remain influential, and the system, in a sense, should accommodate him, but there should be an ordinary rotation of officers in and out of office. You don't want to have another Ayub Khan. But on the other hand, is he displacing the civilians by his expertise and competence? I don't know. I haven't been to Pakistan for a couple of years now, so it's hard for me to make that long-distance judgment.
Thank you, sir. Sir, it's a Monday evening. I request all the media people to please be very brief. And the question, also Mr. Stephen, be brief on the answer, so we have to finish this program and people may have a dinner and go home. So this my next question from Mawar Siddiqui is from the Dunya television. Mawar Siddiqui.
Okay, I'm not going to ask you bilateral between India and Pakistan. I will ask you bilateral between Raheel Sharif and President Gorman. What do you think as an outsider or insider, or after the Panama scandal?
Outsider, insider as prime minister?
Because you know Pakistan inside, you visited so many times, and outside as an American. How do we see the relation between President Gorman and the generals?
Well, you know, the generals have always denied space for politicians to operate in. But in some cases, I'd say Nawaz Sharif's first term, one of his terms, they were justified because Nawaz was running off the rails. He had done unconstitutional acts, such as attacking the Supreme Court. So I don't blame the generals for intervening. But I do blame the generals for not allowing politicians to come up and functioning. I've seen the process in India. India has sort of a farm team of democracy around the country. And politicians test themselves against for the front of the voter. And Pakistan lacks that. It's getting slowly. So, you know, Pakistan is developing some of the social bases of a functioning democracy. And in a functioning democracy, the civilians can easily balance the military. In India, it's perhaps an imbalance in favor of the civilians, but still Pakistan, the imbalance goes the other way. But, you know, let me say this. The original justification for army takeover was that the generals are more competent than the civilians. And that's been true many times. But in fact, generals do not know how to run countries. They do not know economies. They do not know diplomacy. They know military force. They're very good at that. But that's not enough. You need a balanced leadership, a civil-military partnership. I would begin with the National Security Advisor, a civilian National Security Advisor.
Thank you, sir. Apart from asking a question? Mujib Rodi from Pakistan News. So how are you doing today? Are you going here, sir?
Where? I'm sorry.
You said, how are you doing?
My question is, Pakistan defend, Pakistan fight for you in Afghan war, after 9/11, the Musharraf government, we provide all kinds of things what Pakistan can do. Please let us know, our community, please let us know, what was the reason Obama government is not approving F-16 fighter for Pakistan?
Yeah, I think that was primarily a function of the lobby for the Air Force, the company that made the plane. Also, there's anger with Pakistan in Congress. I remember meeting American military officers for the past 10 years, and they were in Afghanistan. And they would come and tell me, Professor, why is our ally, Pakistan, supporting the Taliban who's trying to kill me? So Pakistan lost its lobby in Congress. So I think it was a stupid act of supporting the Afghan Taliban. Now they're being attacked by the Pakistan Taliban, the TTP. In a sense, you could say chickens are coming home to roost. But it's lost much of its lobby in Washington. And it's no longer seen as a moderate Muslim state. It's seen as a state which is supporting terrorism both in Afghanistan and also in India. The evidence in India is very clear.
Chief Member Sir, give it to Mohsen Zaid. Mohsen Zaid, sir. Mohsen Zaid from Sarai, Pakistan.
Dr. Stephen Cohen, is there any workable solution for the Kashmir dispute? Doesn't matter in the near future or in the far future. And second question, you spoke about lies spoken by both Pakistan
Yeah.
and Americans with their people. Could you tell us any big lie both the countries spoke with their people?
Yeah, oh yeah, easy. I think there's one account that's described in my introduction to the Shaver book. And I was in the government then. I talked to a Pakistani friend. And I said, why are you lying about your nuclear program? He said, true, we're lying. His good friend. But we're lying to protect you in Afghanistan. We're denying you're in Afghanistan. So he was right. You know, Pakistan lied in our interest. That would be one example, I think. But there are other cases too, where, and I think we let Pakistan get a free ride in certain terms of its operations against India. I think we should have been tougher against Pakistan. The Kerry Lugar-Berman bill wanted that, put in some of that toughness, but the Pakistan government shot that down. So I think both countries have, and lying is an appropriate word. You're sort of not just bending the truth. Both countries have done it. And we exaggerated Pakistan's importance as a great strategic ally. And Pakistan took our weapons, I think justifiably, I don't blame Pakistan, to use against India. And we looked the other way. When I was in the State Department, I had the little statue, Teen Bandar, 3 monkeys. See no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil. So when people come and talk to me about the Pakistani nuclear program, I point to the 3 monkeys. We don't see it, we don't hear it, we don't talk about it. So, you know, the Shafer book is really good. That describes it.
First question was, is there any workable solution of the Kashmir dispute?
I'm sorry, the F-16?
Any workable solution about Kashmir dispute?
Is there any workable solution for the Kashmir dispute?
Yeah, the solution that everybody agrees to is workable. In other words, there's no solution, or not for the near future. I'd like to see the Kashmiris enjoy the rights of Indian citizens, which they don't. But I'd like to see Pakistan not stop interfering in India and Kashmir as a matter of strategy. I talked to one Pakistani general friend of mine. He said, well, we know we're not going to get Kashmir. We're going to tie down the Indian army in Kashmir. That's Pakistan's strategy. So it was a very cynical policy because it didn't do the Kashmiris any good.
Okay, next question is from Saeed Akhtar, Pakistan Television.
Mr. Stephen, how about Donald Trump's dad, of course, now you're going to vote for him?
I'm glad that question came up. He scares me, as I'm sure he scares a lot of people in this room by the things he said. But I saw Ronald Reagan as president in the second term. And I'm a Democrat. I was not a supporter of Reagan. I thought Reagan did a lot of damage to the United States in his policies, especially economic policy. But there were 2 factors operating, which I thought were interesting. One was Nancy Reagan, who was a sensible, practical lady who wanted to ensure that her husband went down in history in a positive light. So does Trump have a Nancy Reagan around him, a sensible, practical person who can advise him? I don't know. I don't know his family that well, but I hope he does. And secondly, he had George Shultz as his Secretary of State, and I worked for Shultz. And Shultz was a very practical, sensible man. He knew how to influence Reagan. I think Shultz got him involved in Reykjavik, deals with the Soviets on nuclear weapons. In a sense, Shultz was a moderate, intelligent policymaker. So hopefully Trump will find his George Shultz, or Shultz's, and his sensible policy people. And hopefully somebody close to him that he trusts will tell him to do that.
Okay, we have only 5 more questions from the public. And Mr. Saeed Hassan from Secretary from Pakistan.
Hi, Dr. Cohen. Strong military, weak
government and all the issues around us, what are the few things that you, if you were in Pakistan living there and you know you have to live and die there, what are the five things you would suggest that we need to do to live a better life and be secure?
You know, when I met Zia first time, he took me on, he sent me on a one-month tour of Pakistan, mostly with the army. And I think I was the most well-informed foreigner about the Pakistan army at that time. And his one condition was, come back and tell him what I saw. So I wrote a list of 25 things that the army should be doing, or isn't doing, could be doing. And he put on his glasses, and he went down the list and said, good, bad, good, we do this, bad, good. It's an interesting, it's something I'm going to publish. In fact, I should have published it in this book. And I think basically the Army should stand back, allow civilians to mature, develop, go after the people we know are terrorists. There's a list, an American list, there's an Indian list. But people who are attacking Pakistan and so on. They're doing this with the TTP. But if you label every critic of the government as a terrorist, you're going to be declaring war on your own people. So in a sense, the Pakistan army has had a problem distinguishing the real terrorists from people who are just politically inconvenient. So I don't know if that's five or not, but I can give you the long list if you want.
Okay, let me have my side. Chairman of Bali, Zahir Ahmed, please exit.
You just said, how do you justify, you said Pakistan army supporting the Taliban. Thank you. We are the one victim of the Taliban. Our brother, sister got killed, our children got killed with the Taliban. We are the most victim nation in the world to the Taliban. And how do you justify Pakistan army supporting Taliban?
Pakistan officials like to boast that they're the most victimized people in the world, which is maybe true, maybe not true. But they are also supporting, as a state, the other Taliban, the Afghan Taliban. And the Afghan Taliban have their families living in Pakistan. They get medical care in Afghanistan. They get rest and rearmament in Pakistan. In other words, they run from Pakistan. And that's what makes Americans angry. When those Taliban came over the border, shot at Americans, went back to Pakistan, you know, Pakistanis would say, well, they're only with us for one day. Sir, फिर बोले हैं? नहीं समझता.
But we are claiming same thing, the Afghan, Taliban, cross the border.
Oh,
We claim same thing.
I'm not an Afghan expert, but I understand that. But you're right in that Pakistan is being attacked from possibly bases in Afghanistan. But that implies Afghan-Pakistan cooperation. And I hear from both sides that the other side isn't producing it. So I'm a private citizen, I'm not a government official. I can't pass judgment on that. But to be honest, I don't know the situation in Afghanistan that well.
The next question by Nadeem Abid from Vice Chairman, Democratic Party.
First, let me thank Dr. Nisar Chaudhary and Raja Sahab for organizing this beautiful program and giving us a chance to speak to you, sir. I'm one of the very few lucky people in this hall who have read your book. And that book is a very, very interesting book, and there's a lot of information, but it does not tell you a few things I want to point out with your permission, sir. Lord Mountbatten signed the Order of Accession for Kashmir, but it very clearly said that this is a temporary arrangement and the future of Kashmir will be decided by the people of Kashmir. Your book does not make any mention of that. Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, addressing his nation on April 11, 1951, and several times later on after this, saying that we have made a commitment with the world to give a right of self-determination to people of Kashmir. As a nation, we will not and cannot fail. Your book does not make any mention of that. United Nations have 24 resolutions on Kashmir. There is one common thing in all 24 resolutions. Every single resolution is signed by the United States of America. So United States of America have the moral obligation to fulfill the promise they made to the people of Kashmir by giving them the right of self-determination. Sir, your book does not mention that. And in the last, I'll just make one quick comment. You said that government of Pakistan uses terrorists to protect its policy. I totally disagree with it, sir.
you're factually wrong on a couple of counts, but we don't want to bore the audience with a discussion with a. It's like Chicago. Yeah, we don't. Yeah, we don't want to get into a detailed discussion of Kashmir. I'd be happy to come up and engage you in that. The British terms were that the viceroy or the the Diwan, the prince, would make the choice.
Too late.
Before he could, the Pakistan forces from Pakistan, from NWFP, I met the British officer was with him, invaded Kashmir. And that forced the Maharaja to declare in favor of India, probably under duress when the Indian case is kind of shaky there. So national self-determination is not mentioned in the agreement at all. Mountbatten said the Maharaja should take into consideration the sentiments of his population, but that wasn't national self-determination. So, you know, the Pakistani case and the Indian case emphasize different facts. That's why we don't think that there's going to be a resolution. The United States tried to resolve this year after year after year, and then all governments have decided it's just not worth the effort.
Okay, thank you. We have the last person from this side. Mr. Tahir is from the Bronx Community Council.
Professor Steve, welcome to the first time in Pakistani American community. I also congratulate that when the US and India had a nuke streak. So you the only one that you say that Pakistan should be have the same thing. But the US Congress did not agree with that. It comes to the books. I'm confused few things in your books, like majority of the Pakistani Americans. You say Allama Muhammad Iqbal was studied in Aligarh, but there is no evidence that he did not. The second thing you said about the Dawoodi Bohra ethnic community persecuted violently in Karachi. Many Pakistani American and Pakistanis are not agreed that there could be an individual persecuted because they are the integral, respected and mercantile community in the Karachi. The last and the third one, for some reason you say Mr. Zardari was the best president Pakistan ever had. If that is the criteria that he was linked to the India relationship, then General Ziaulak was the first one, then Benazir Bhutto was the second, then General Musharraf, and then Nawaz Sharif has.
I think you're totally misquoting me, and I don't recognize any of the. I said Zardari was the best president up till that point that Pakistan had had. Certainly better than Zia and some of its predecessors. That was the point I was making. I didn't say he was a good president. I said he was the best Pakistan had had. But I think in your other comments are just, I don't know where you're quoting from, which book you're quoting from.
Okay,
Please.
Please be seated, okay? Now we have the next question from Sabat No.
Hello and Assalamu alaikum. My question is like in the current scenario, not regarding the past and all the history, that currently after having more name in Panama League, what's your opinion about that? Is there any impact we have or like you think about present Pakistani government about having more name in Panama League? That is my question.
Yeah.
Thank you.
What's the question?
About Panama League.
I'll confess I know nothing about the Panama Papers at all, except they're going to cause a lot of people a lot of trouble. I'm not a...
नहीं नहीं that will कब तक बिठाएंगे
Talaba Pakistan Kashmiri community. Welcome over here. As an expert, American policies, as the author, history, you know that 1.50 million people are in Kashmir. And India and Pakistan divided on two theories. It was the choice of the Kashmiris to decide join with Pakistan or India. But at that time, as you mentioned, Nehru bring this case to the United Nations. And United Nations promised with the Kashmiris that they will get the opportunity to decide about their future. How come you say that Kashmir should be the Indian citizen? As a historian, as a politician, as a seasoned person, when Nehru promised that we will get the opportunity to the Kashmiri people to decide about the future, it never happened. How you say that Kashmir should be the Indian citizen, number one. Number second, you know the Taliban, the CIA and America create the Taliban to fight against Russia in Afghanistan and Pakistan after. And we fight against Russia. At that time, India was the partner of the Russia. You supporting India. That India. Sir, give the question. What is the question? The question is that India is the country who don't fulfill the promise to the Kashmiris. What you suggest me? How we solve the Kashmir problem? Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Yeah, let me say that Nehru made two major mistakes. One of them was to take the issue to the UN Security Council. And I've heard senior Indian officials criticize Nehru for having done that. The other mistake was to speak publicly in Indian cities saying that Pakistan won't exist, it won't last. And I think that attitude, which was shared by some Indian politicians, but not Gandhi, was catastrophic. That if you think your neighbor isn't going to survive, don't help him. And the Indians cut off arms supplies and economic spike to Pakistan right from the beginning. So Pakistanis have a grievance with India not believing that they deserve to exist right from the beginning. And in my books, I try to make that clear. So I think those are two mistakes Nehru made. He was a great man in many ways, but on Kashmir and on Pakistan, two fundamentally flawed decisions.
Okay, let me have two more to go in my side. 5 minutes.
Two last questions.
Good evening, sir. My name is Tahir. I represent the Pakistani American community of New York. The first question is, how do you differentiate, how do you the relationship between Pakistan and India, and how do you justify the relationship between the Palestine and Israel? And the other, according to your book, since I was sitting here, unfortunately I did not read the book. Otherwise I would have come with a better question, because a lot of the questions people are asking, they are like, we are having some kind of a debate. But, the question again is, how do you justify the people of Pakistan and the people of India versus what's happening with Palestine and Israel?
Well, I don't justify it, I explain it. And the explanation is, in all 4 cases, each country, Israel, Pakistan, India, and the Palestinians, believe that they are a threatened minority. That is, that they're going to be the victim, and they don't want to be a victim. It's easy to see in the case of Israel and Palestine and Pakistan, you're smaller, but in the case of India, it's more complicated. The Indian political community does not have a sense of itself as a great power. Modi's trying to establish that sense. And part of the struggle for identity in India is to become a great power. But when the British left South Asia, they got rid of the British Raj and the Mughal Empire, and neither India nor Pakistan could dominate in South Asia. Neither of you have the power to dominate the other. In the case of Israel and Palestine, the Palestinians have discovered that people's war, guerrilla war, can balance Israeli military power. So it's a stalemate, and I don't see any resolution to these two disputes in the future at all. If you do, please let me know. We can write a book together.
Last
Last question, Shazia. Samia.
Hello, I have a question for either of you on the panel that I think you would be able to answer best. Unfortunately, living in America, being born here, Pakistani Americans have a very bad name because they are anti-Jewish, and I think that's not true. So what do you think is the best way to start a dialogue between Pakistani American youth and Jewish American youth communities to build a friendship?
You know, I gave a talk at my 50th anniversary celebration in Chicago, in the temple where my wife and I were married. That was
I have
about
a few remarks and
15, 20 years ago.
I'll bring it to a closure.
And I talked about the need for reconciliation. And I told this Jewish temple, go out and find a Muslim
No, he
community
doesn't deserve anything.
and invite them over. Invite them for tea or pakoras or whatever you want to invite them for. And in a sense, the best way to do it is to walk around the corner, find a local Jewish synagogue. Hopefully they won't be crazy, they'll be normal. And ask them, just for a discussion of what's going on. You can tell them about your situation in Afghanistan, Pakistan, India. They can explain Palestine. You'll find a lot of similarities. You may not agree, but the structure is similar. And I think all four countries have a minority complex. All four countries are worried about being the victim. My roommate in college was a Palestinian, so my nickname on Twitter is Abu Cohen. And he's a Saeed Abu-Rish, eminent Palestinian journalist. So I think that, we've got to rid ourselves of the victim mentality. You see this in some of the political campaigns here. We're the victim, the fault is Congress, the fault is this, the fault is that, the fault is the Muslim world. I will make it great again. Well, I don't think that works. I think that paranoia is not a solution, not an answer to problems. But I think the American electorate will be smart enough to deal with that issue. So that's what I would say.
Give it to me.
We are over with the question and answer. And now I would like to request Dr.
Please, let's close it now. Ladies and gentlemen, I am very grateful for all of you. You really asked very exciting questions, very wonderful questions, and there is no end to questions. I wish there was more time and more questions to be asked, but he has 2 books here. Many of your questions could be answered through those books. And let's close this session now and go for the dinner. And he's still here. You can ask any question in conversation and talk to each other, whatever you want. Thank you very much. God bless you and good night.